For centuries, two stories about our origins have waged a silent war for the soul of humanity. The first story says that a personal God looked at his creation and regretted it. He decided to exterminate everything with water. He ordered a man to build a giant boat. He gathered all the animals in pairs. He made it rain for 40 days until the mountains disappeared beneath the waters. And then, from a single boat, all life on earth began anew. The second story says that there was no global flood. That species did not appear ready from an instantaneous creative act, that life evolved over billions of years through blind natural processes, that we are not the center of the universe, that we are just another branch on the tree of life, sharing ancestors with all other creatures on the planet. Ark or evolution, faith or reason, Genesis or Darwin. But there is a hidden connection between these two narratives that almost no one knows. An intellectual bridge built by a man who lived 200 years before Darwin was born. A man who was erased from history, excommunicated, persecuted, nearly murdered, and who died alone at 44 years old, breathing glass dust. His name was Baruch Spinoza, and he made Darwin possible. Because Spinoza did something that no one had dared to do before. He took the Bible, the holiest book of the West, and treated it like any other ancient text. He analyzed it. He dissected it. He found contradictions. He identified errors. He noted anachronisms. And he reached a devastating conclusion. Moses did not write the Pentateuch. The Bible is not the literal word of God. It is a human document compiled over centuries by authors with specific political agendas. If the Bible is human, then the story of the flood does not need to be literal. It can be metaphor, myth, a narrative created by ancient tribes to explain local floods they did not understand. Just as many other ancient cultures had flood stories, Mesopotamia, Sumer, Babylon, all predating the biblical account, but Spinoza went far beyond textual criticism. He did something even more radical. He redefined God. In 8 Latin words that changed everything, Deus sive natura, God or nature, not God and nature, not God above nature controlling it like a celestial puppeteer, but God as nature, one and the same, indivisible, inseparable, eternal. The implications are devastating. If God is nature, then miracles are impossible, because a miracle would require God to violate his own laws, and God cannot contradict himself. Nature does not suspend gravity. Nature does not create water out of nothing to cover mountains. Therefore, the global flood never happened. The ark never existed. Noah is a mythical character. Spinoza destroyed the theological foundations of creationism 200 years before Darwin presented scientific evidence for evolution. He eliminated the need for an interventionist God. He opened conceptual space for science to explain the origin of species without needing to invoke divine magic, and he paid a terrible price for it. He was excommunicated with the most brutal curse in Jewish history. His family renounced him. His friends abandoned him. They tried to assassinate him in the street. His books were banned. His name became synonymous with atheism and heresy. He survived by polishing lenses for telescopes, inhaling glass dust every day, slowly destroying his lungs. He died alone, poor, forgotten, but his ideas survived. They influenced the Enlightenment. They inspired democratic revolutions. They created the philosophical foundation for the separation of church and state. And they made it possible for Darwin, 2 centuries later, to publish On the Origin of Species without being burned alive by the Inquisition. When Albert Einstein was asked if he believed in God, he replied, "I believe in the God of Spinoza, who reveals himself in the ordered harmony of what exists, not in a God who cares about the fate and actions of human beings." This statement contains a complete revolution. God exists, but not as religions teach. He is not an anthropomorphic being judging sins. He is the mathematical structure of the universe, the laws of physics, the order that allows atoms to organize into stars, planets, oceans, cells, DNA, consciousness. And if God is this, then evolution is not a threat to faith. Evolution is the method of creation, not through instantaneous magic, but through slow, relentless natural processes, elegant in their blind mechanics. The battle between ark and evolution is a false dichotomy, created by fundamentalists who insist that the Bible must be literal, and by materialists who insist that science has proven that God does not exist. Both have missed the point that Spinoza tried to teach 400 years ago. The real battle is not between God and Darwin. It is between dogma and free thought, between religious authority and individual reason, between the fear of questioning and the courage to seek truth. What you are about to discover is not just the history of philosophy. It is the story of how humanity emerged from the cave of superstition. It is the story of a man who preferred to die free than to live lying. It is the story of how 8 words, Deus sive natura, changed everything forever. You will see how Spinoza dismantled the story of the ark using only logic. You will understand why evolution does not compete with God, but reveals his true method. You will discover the hidden connection between 17th century philosophy and 19th century biology. And you will learn to do the most dangerous and liberating thing there is, to think for yourself. The story begins with a secret manuscript, a truth so powerful that it would make kings and popes tremble, a truth that can still change your life today, if you have the courage to hear it. 17th century Europe was a continent on intellectual fire. The Inquisition was still burning heretics in public squares. Galileo had been forced to deny that the earth revolved around the sun. The Catholic Church controlled what could be thought, said, written, published. One wrong thought could mean torture, imprisonment, death. And in the midst of this theological hell, there was a community that prided itself on being different. The Sephardic Jews, refugees from the Spanish and Portuguese Inquisition, had found asylum in the tolerant cities of Northern Europe. There, they rebuilt their synagogues, their schools, their lives. And it was in this community, in this environment of relative freedom, that Baruch Spinoza was born in 1632. His father was a respected merchant. His family had prestige in the Jewish community. He was educated in the best rabbinical schools. He learned Hebrew, Aramaic, the Torah, the Talmud, the commentaries of the sages. Everything indicated that he would follow in the footsteps of the rabbis, that he would become a respected religious leader, that he would teach the sacred scriptures to the next generations. But something went wrong, or terribly right, depending on how you see it. Spinoza began to ask questions, simple questions, dangerous questions. If God is perfect, why does he regret creating humanity before the flood? If God is omniscient, how can he be surprised by human wickedness? If God is immutable, how can he change his mind? If Moses wrote the Pentateuch, how does the text describe Moses' death in the third person? How could Moses write about events that happened centuries after his death? The rabbis had ready answers, answers that had been repeated for 1,000 years, divine mysteries that the human mind cannot comprehend, metaphors that should not be interpreted literally, tests of faith that should not be questioned. But these answers did not satisfy Spinoza, because he had discovered something dangerous. He had learned Latin, and through Latin he had access to something that few Jews of his time had: Greek philosophy, Aristotle, Plato, and more importantly, the medieval philosophers who tried to reconcile reason and faith: Thomas Aquinas, Avicenna, Averroes, Maimonides. And the more he read, the more he realized something disturbing. The Bible was not a single, divine, perfect text. It was a collection of texts written at different times by different authors with different purposes. There were layers. There were edits. There were contradictions that could not be explained as metaphors. Genesis, for example, has 2 accounts of creation. In the first, God creates the animals before creating man and woman simultaneously. In the second, God creates man first, then the animals, and finally creates woman from man's rib. They are not variations of the same story. They are fundamentally different stories, with different orders, with different theologies. And the story of the flood has the same problem. There are 2 intertwined accounts. In one, Noah is ordered to take 2 of each animal. In another, 7 pairs of clean animals and 1 pair of unclean animals. In one, the rain lasts 40 days. In another, 150 days. The details do not fit. They are not complementary. They are contradictory. Spinoza began to take notes, comparisons, textual analyses, and the conclusion was inevitable. The Pentateuch was not written by Moses. It was compiled centuries later by scribes who gathered different oral traditions, different documents, different versions of the same story, and in the process of compilation, they did not remove the contradictions. They simply left them side by side, hoping that no one would notice. But Spinoza noticed, and he made the fatal mistake of sharing his discoveries, first with close friends, then in discussions at rabbinical schools, and quickly the news spread. There was a young man questioning the Mosaic authorship of the Torah. There was someone suggesting that the Bible was a fallible human document. The community leaders were terrified, not because of the heresy itself, although that was serious, but because of the political danger. The Jewish community lived under precarious tolerance. One misstep, an accusation of blasphemy, and the protection could be removed. The Inquisition was not that far away. Refugees were still arriving with stories of torture, forced conversions, public executions. Spinoza was summoned by the rabbis. He was warned. He was threatened. They offered him money to stay quiet, a lifetime pension if he stopped speaking, stopped teaching, stopped writing about these dangerous ideas. He refused, not out of pride, not out of stubbornness, but because he had discovered something more important than money, more important than social acceptance, more important even than physical safety. He had discovered that truth does not negotiate, that you cannot half believe in something, that you cannot pretend that contradictions do not exist, that you cannot turn off your mind just because the logical conclusion is inconvenient. And then came the excommunication. In 1656, when Spinoza was only 23 years old, the Jewish community pronounced the most severe cherem in modern history. It was not a common excommunication. It was a curse, an attempt to erase his existence. No one could speak to him. No one could do business with him. No one could read his writings. No one could be near him. His family had to treat him as dead. The sentence was so extreme that even today historians debate what exactly Spinoza said to provoke such a reaction. Because the official records do not detail his specific crimes, they only say that he held abominable opinions and committed monstrous acts, but they do not specify which opinions, which acts. The official silence is revealing, because it suggests that the rabbis knew that if they detailed the accusations, they would have to expose their own weaknesses in their arguments. It was safer to simply demonize him without explanation, to turn him into an example. A warning for anyone else who might think of questioning. Spinoza could have recanted. He could have begged for forgiveness. Many have done so throughout history. Galileo did. He publicly denied that the earth revolved around the sun, even though he knew it was true. He survived. He continued studying in secret, but publicly he bowed down. Spinoza did not bow down. He accepted the excommunication. He moved away from the Jewish community. He adopted the Latin name Benedictus, and he began to live as he could, polishing lenses for microscopes and telescopes, a manual job that allowed for modest survival but slowly destroyed his lungs with glass particles. And in this self-imposed exile, in this forced solitude, he began to write. Not in Hebrew, in Latin, because now he was writing for a different audience, not for Jews, not for Christians, but for anyone who had the courage to think. The first major work was the theological political treatise. And right in the first pages, Spinoza made his mission clear. He was not trying to destroy religion, he was trying to separate it from politics, because the mixing of the two created tyranny, created persecution, created war. Europe was bleeding from religious wars, Catholics killing Protestants, Protestants killing Catholics, all citing the Bible, all claiming that God was on their side. And Spinoza looked at this bloodbath and realized something fundamental. The problem was not that people interpreted the Bible differently. The problem was that they believed the Bible was the literal word of God. Because if you believe that every word of the Bible came directly from God, then to disagree with your interpretation is to disagree with God. And to disagree with God is heresy, and heresy must be punished with death. But what if the Bible was not the literal word of God? What if it was a human document, written by people trying to understand the divine through the limitations of their time, culture, language? Then disagreements of interpretation would not be heresies. They would just be different perspectives on a complex text. That was the revolutionary idea that Spinoza was proposing, and to support it, he needed to demonstrate that the Bible was indeed human, not divine. He needed to prove that Moses did not write the Pentateuch. He needed to show the contradictions, the anachronisms, the impossibilities. And he started with the story that most Christians and Jews knew, the story that was taught to all children from a very young age, the story of the flood and Noah's Ark. Spinoza opened Genesis and began to read with the eyes of a literary critic, not a believer, and immediately he noticed something strange. The flood story does not flow naturally. It repeats itself. It goes in circles. It contradicts itself. Let's look at the exact details that Spinoza examined. In chapter 6 of Genesis, God says to Noah, "Of every clean animal you shall take for yourself 7 and 7, the male and his female. But of the animals that are not clean, 2, the male and his female. 7 pairs of clean animals, 1 pair of unclean animals." That is quite specific. But just a few verses earlier in the same chapter, God had said, "Of everything that lives, of all flesh, you shall bring 2 of every sort into the ark, 2 of every sort, not 7, no distinction between clean and unclean, just 2. How can God give 2 different orders in the same speech? Spinoza realized that the simplest explanation was not that God changed his mind. It was that these were 2 different documents being woven together by a later editor who did not care to resolve the contradiction, and the contradictions continue. How many days did the flood last? The text says 40 days and 40 nights of rain, but it also says that the waters prevailed upon the earth for 150 days. So was it 40 days or 150? The answer matters, because it reveals that we are not reading a factual account. We are reading a compilation of different traditions. Spinoza went deeper. He examined the structure of the narrative, and he realized that you can literally separate 2 complete accounts. In one of them, the divinity is called Yahweh. In the other, it is called Elohim. One uses certain technical terms, the other uses different terms. One has a literary style, the other has a different style. Modern biblical scholars have confirmed exactly what Spinoza had perceived 300 years earlier. The Pentateuch is a compilation of at least 4 different sources, written at different times by different authors, and edited together by later scribes. They call this the documentary hypothesis, but Spinoza had already reached the same conclusion in the 17th century, using only logic and attention to detail. And if the flood story is a compilation of human traditions, not divine revelation, then there is no reason to believe that it actually happened as described. There may have been local floods. There may have been stories of survivors, but a flood that covered the entire earth to the top of the highest mountains? Impossible. Spinoza did the math. The highest mountains known at the time were several kilometers tall. To cover them completely with water would require an absurd amount of water. Where did that water come from? The text says that the fountains of the great deep were broken up and the windows of heaven were opened. But where is this deep? Where are these windows? Biblical cosmology assumes that there is a solid firmament in the sky with water above it. That is why it rains. When the windows open, the water from above falls, and there is water below the earth as well. This is the worldview of ancient Mesopotamia. The earth is a flat disk floating in water, with a solid dome above separating the atmospheric water. But in the 17th century, this cosmology was already dead. Galileo had looked through the telescope. There was no solid dome, there was no water above the sky. Space continued. There were moons around Jupiter. There were mountains on the moon. The universe was vastly larger and more complex than the Bible suggested. So if there is not enough water for a global flood, if biblical cosmology is wrong, if the story has internal contradictions, why believe that it actually happened? Spinoza was dismantling not just a story. He was dismantling the entire method of biblical interpretation that had dominated for 1,000 years. The method that said, if the Bible states something, it is true, and our job is to explain how it is true, not to question whether it is true. Spinoza proposed the opposite. Treat the Bible like any other ancient text. Examine its claims. Look for evidence. Accept that human authors could be wrong, that they could be using metaphors, that they could be telling cultural myths as if they were history. And this brings us to the heart of the matter. Why does the flood story exist in the Bible? Spinoza argued that it serves a theological purpose, not a historical one. The story teaches that God judges wickedness, that there is consequence for sin, that God can destroy and start over. It is a narrative about divine justice, not a journalistic account of a real event. And curiously, the story is not unique. The Epic of Gilgamesh, written in Babylon 1,000 years before Genesis, has an almost identical flood story. A man is warned by a god. He builds a boat. He saves animals. He survives a devastating flood. He releases birds to see if the water has receded. The boat runs aground on a mountain. The details are so similar that it is impossible to be a coincidence. Clearly, either the Bible copied from Gilgamesh, or both copied from an even older source. And if the Bible copied from pagan myths, then the story cannot be a unique divine revelation. It is cultural adaptation. This devastates the idea that the Bible is special, unique, directly inspired by God. Because God does not plagiarize. God does not take stories from pagan cultures and rewrite them with a monotheistic gloss. Spinoza was saying something radical. The Bible is literature, sacred literature, yes, important literature, yes, but literature created by humans, reflecting the beliefs, fears, hopes, and limitations of humans from a specific time. And if you really want to understand the Bible, do not read it as if it were a manual of science or history. Read it as literature. Look for its moral wisdom, its poetic beauty, its deep existential questions. But do not confuse metaphor with fact. Do not confuse myth with reporting. Think about it now. As you are watching this video, as these words are entering your mind, you are confronting the same choice that Spinoza confronted. You can continue reading the Bible the way you always have, assuming that every word is literal, that every story happened exactly as written. Or you can start asking the questions that Spinoza asked, the hard questions, the dangerous questions. If this story really changed something in you, if something clicked in your mind right now, leave a comment. It doesn't have to be long, just one word, one sentence. What did you feel when you realized that the flood story may not be literal? Fear, relief, confusion, freedom? Because this journey we are taking together is not just about Spinoza. It is about you, about what you are willing to question, about how far you are willing to go in search of the truth, even if that truth destroys comfortable beliefs. And if you want to continue this journey, if you want to see how far this philosophical rabbit hole goes, subscribe now, because what comes next is even more disturbing. We will discover how Spinoza not only destroyed the literalness of the Bible, but completely redefined what God is. And this redefinition made evolution not only possible but inevitable. But Spinoza did not stop at the textual criticism of the Bible. He went much deeper. He realized that the fundamental problem was not just that the Bible had contradictions. The problem was the very idea of miracle. Because the flood story depends on multiple miracles. God makes it rain in impossible quantities. God guides all the animals to the ark. God preserves Noah and his family for months floating in a wooden boat. God makes the water disappear to some inexplicable place. Every part of the story violates known natural laws. And Spinoza asked a devastating question. What is a miracle? The traditional answer is an event that violates the laws of nature. God suspends the normal rules of the universe to intervene directly. But this creates a huge philosophical problem. If God created the laws of nature, why would he need to violate them? If the laws are perfect, breaking them implies that they were not perfect after all. If the laws are not perfect, then God is not perfect. And if God is not perfect, then he is not God. Spinoza built a logically impeccable argument. God is perfect. Therefore, God's creation must be perfect. Therefore, the laws of nature are perfect. Therefore, they do not need to be violated. Therefore, miracles do not happen. Not because God lacks power, but because miracles would imply imperfection in the original design. It is like a perfect watchmaker. If the watch is perfectly built, it never needs adjustments. It never stops. It never runs late. If the watchmaker constantly needs to open the watch and tinker with the gears, then the watch was not well built. And if God constantly needs to intervene in the universe with miracles, then the universe was not well built. But we know, through observation, that the universe works perfectly through consistent laws. Gravity always works. Chemistry always works. Physics always works. There are no documented cases of water spontaneously turning into wine, or axes floating, or rain falling until it covers mountains. Therefore, Spinoza concludes, the miracles described in the Bible never happened as described. They are either misunderstandings of natural phenomena, or literary exaggerations, or didactic fiction. The rain that lasted 40 days. There may have been a particularly strong monsoon season. Local floods are common in Mesopotamian regions, but not a global flood. The story was amplified over generations of oral transmission until it became mythical. This line of reasoning was deeply dangerous, because if miracles do not happen, then Jesus did not physically resurrect. Moses did not part the Red Sea. Joshua did not stop the sun. And the entire edifice of traditional Christianity and Judaism crumbles. Spinoza knew this. He knew he was dynamiting the foundations of Western faith, and he did not do it lightly. He did it because he had realized something even deeper. That true spirituality does not depend on miracles. That true connection with the divine does not come from believing in impossible supernatural events. It comes from understanding the natural order of the universe. And this leads us to Spinoza's most radical contribution, his complete redefinition of God. Most people in the 17th century thought of God as a being separate from creation. God is in heaven. We are on earth. He watches us. He judges. He intervenes when he wants. There is a fundamental distance between creator and creation. Spinoza demolished this distinction. He argued that God and nature are identical. Deus sive natura. God or nature, not two, one. What does this mean? It means that God is not somewhere outside the universe manipulating it remotely. God is the universe itself. Every atom is God. Every physical force is God. Every natural law is God. There is nothing that is not God. This idea is called pantheism, and it has devastating consequences for traditional religion. If God is nature, then God has no personality, does not get angry, does not get happy, does not repent, does not change his mind, because these are human emotions. And nature has no emotions. Nature simply is. If God is nature, then it is pointless to pray for intervention, because you would be asking nature to violate itself, which is incoherent. If God is nature, then there is no afterlife in the traditional sense. There is no heaven. There is no hell. There are no eternal rewards or eternal punishments, because these ideas depend on a personal God who judges, and nature does not judge. Nature simply operates according to its laws. If God is nature, then there is no free will in the traditional sense, because everything that happens is the result of prior causes that are the result of even earlier causes in an infinite chain of causality. You do not choose your thoughts. Your thoughts are the results of brain processes that are the results of chemistry that is the result of physics. Everything is determined. You can imagine the shock that these ideas caused. Spinoza was saying that there is no cosmic purpose. There is no special divine plan for humanity. There is no salvation. There is no damnation. There is only the universe functioning according to its own eternal and immutable laws. And yet, Spinoza insisted that he was not an atheist. He believed in God deeply, but his God was completely different from the God of religions. Spinoza's God does not love you, but he also does not hate you, because love and hate are human emotions projected onto something that transcends humanity. Spinoza's God simply is, exists, is the totality of everything that exists. And understanding this, living according to this understanding, is the only genuine spirituality. Spinoza called this amor intellectualis Dei, the intellectual love of God, not emotional love, intellectual love, the rational contemplation of the eternal order of the universe, the understanding that you are a small part of an infinite and perfect whole. This is not traditional religious comfort. It does not promise eternal life in paradise. It does not promise that your loved ones will be waiting for you. It does not promise that God is taking care of you personally. It is a cold, rational, mathematical spirituality. But Spinoza argued that it was more honest, more true, and paradoxically, more liberating. Because if you are not special in the eyes of God, if the universe does not revolve around you, if there is no cosmic reward or punishment, then you are free to live without fear, free to seek knowledge, without concern for heresy, free to explore the universe knowing that no sensitive creator is being offended, and more importantly for our story, free to investigate nature without presupposing miracles, free to look at evidence from rocks, fossils, stars, and accept what they reveal, even if it contradicts sacred scriptures. This intellectual freedom that Spinoza achieved through his radical philosophy was absolutely essential for the development of modern science. Because as long as people believed that God constantly intervenes in nature, it would be impossible to do true science. It would be impossible to establish reliable natural laws, because at any moment, God could break the rules. But if Spinoza is right, if God is nature and not the violator, then natural laws are absolute, immutable, reliable, and can be studied. And once you can study them, you can understand how the universe really works, without supernatural interference. Just natural processes, and this opens the door to evolution. Because evolution is the ultimate natural process, evolution does not need God guiding every mutation. It does not need God creating each species separately. It only needs time, reproduction, variation, and selection. Blind natural processes operating over millions of years. Darwin did not know Spinoza deeply, but Darwin was working in an intellectual world that Spinoza had helped create. A world where it was acceptable to question the Bible. A world where miracles were not necessary to explain natural phenomena. A world where nature could be studied on its own merits. The connection between Spinoza and Darwin is not accidental. It is deep and structural. To understand this, we need to look exactly at what Darwin discovered and why it was so controversial. In 1831, Charles Darwin embarked on the HMS Beagle as a naturalist. For 5 years, he traveled around the world collecting specimens, making observations, taking meticulous notes, and slowly, a disturbing idea began to form in his mind. Species were not fixed. They were not created in their current forms on the 6th day of creation. They changed over time. He saw this in the Galapagos Islands, where each island had its own versions of finches with beaks adapted to different food sources. He saw this in fossils that showed extinct life forms that were similar but not identical to modern forms. He saw this in comparative anatomy that revealed homologous structures among very different species, suggesting common ancestry. But Darwin hesitated. He knew what this idea meant. If species evolve, then they were not created individually by God. If humans evolved from primate ancestors, then they were not made in the image of God. If there is no special creation, then the entire Genesis narrative is false. Darwin waited 20 years before publishing. 20 years holding back the most important discovery in biology. 20 years afraid of the reaction. And when he finally published On the Origin of Species in 1859, the world exploded. Bishops were furious. In a famous debate at Oxford, Bishop Samuel Wilberforce sarcastically asked Darwin's defender, Thomas Huxley, whether he descended from monkeys on his grandfather's side or his grandmother's side. Huxley replied that he would rather have a monkey as an ancestor than a man who used his gifts to obscure the truth. But the anger was not just ecclesiastical, it was existential, because evolution destroyed something fundamental about how people saw themselves. They were not the pinnacle of creation. They were not special. They were just another species among millions, shaped by the same blind forces that shaped worms and bacteria. And worse, evolution had no direction. It had no purpose. It was not progressing toward some divine goal. It was just happening. Random mutations. Natural selection eliminating the less fit. No plan. No meaning. Just survival and reproduction. This is the true threat of evolution to traditional religion. It is not that it contradicts some verses from Genesis. It is that it completely removes the need for an intentional creator. The universe can self-organize. Life can arise from chemistry. Complexity can emerge from simplicity through slow, natural processes. God becomes unnecessary as an explanation. But here is the deep irony. This worldview, this possibility of a self-sufficient universe without divine intervention, had already been articulated by Spinoza 200 years earlier. When Spinoza said that God is nature, he was saying that the universe contains within itself the reason for its existence. It does not need an external creator who made it and now sustains it. The universe is self-sustaining. It is self-explanatory. It is the cause of itself, causa sui. This idea is fundamental to making evolution conceptually possible, because if you believe that God created each species individually at a specific moment, then evolution is impossible by definition. But if you believe that nature operates by its own laws without external interference, then evolution is not only possible, it is inevitable. Given enough time, given genetic variation, given selective pressure, Species must change, not by design, by statistical necessity. Those that adapt better survive more. Those that survive more reproduce more. Advantageous traits spread through the population. Over millions of generations, small changes accumulate into large transformations. Fish develop legs. Reptiles develop feathers. Primates develop large brains. Nothing magical, nothing supernatural. Just natural processes operating according to the laws of chemistry, physics, probability. And this is exactly the kind of universe that Spinoza had described. A universe governed by eternal and immutable laws. A universe without miracles. A universe where everything happens out of necessity, not divine whim. Spinoza could not have predicted the details of Darwin's theory. He did not know genetics. He did not know the actual age of the Earth. He did not know the fossil record. But he had established the philosophical framework that made evolution possible. He had destroyed the conceptual barrier between the divine and the natural. He had eliminated miracles. He had demonstrated that the Bible was not a scientific authority. He had created intellectual space to study nature on its own terms. And when Darwin finally presented empirical evidence of evolution, the philosophical ground had already been prepared. Not completely. The resistance was enormous, but at least it was possible to have the conversation. It was possible to consider the idea without being immediately burned as a heretic. Compare this to the fate of Giordano Bruno a century before Spinoza. Bruno proposed that the universe was infinite and contained multiple worlds. The Inquisition burned him alive in 1600. Literally, tied to a stake in the public square of Rome. Darwin was not burned. He was criticized, he was ridiculed, but he was not tortured or executed. And part of the reason is that the intellectual climate had changed, and Spinoza was one of the main agents of that change. There are fascinating letters from 19th century scientists that show this influence. They do not cite Spinoza directly. In fact, many avoid mentioning his name because it was still synonymous with atheism and heresy. But Spinoza's ideas had infiltrated European thought. They had become part of the air that intellectuals breathed. The idea that nature operates by its own laws. The idea that miracles do not happen. The idea that the Bible should be read critically, not literally. These ideas, all originated or strengthened by Spinoza, created the soil in which evolution could germinate. And today, in the 21st century, we are still grappling with the implications. In the United States, there are states where teachers are pressured to teach creationism alongside evolution. There are creationist museums with dinosaurs living alongside humans. There are millions of people who believe that the Earth is 6,000 years old, and that Noah's flood explains the fossil record. How is this possible? How after 150 years of overwhelming evidence for evolution, after sequencing complete genomes showing unequivocal evolutionary relationships, is there still such strong resistance? The answer lies in Spinoza, because what is really at stake is not science versus religion. It is one worldview versus another. It is the view of a universe intentionally created for us versus the view of an indifferent universe that accidentally produced us. And this second view is frightening. It removes cosmic significance. It removes divine purpose. It removes the guarantee of an afterlife. It removes the idea that we are special, loved, watched over by a benevolent creator. Spinoza faced this philosophical terror head-on, and his response was not to pretend that the terror does not exist. It was to embrace it and find a different kind of meaning, not meaning given by an external God, but meaning created through understanding your connection to the whole. You are not special in the sense of being God's favorite, but you are part of the universe experiencing itself. You are the universe made conscious, and there is a deep beauty in that, a spirituality that does not depend on comforting lies. This is the scientific spirituality that Einstein embraced. When he said he believed in the God of Spinoza, he was saying, "I see order, beauty, mathematical elegance in the universe." And that inspires me with reverence. I don't need to believe in an old man with a beard in the sky to feel a connection with the cosmos. And this is the same spirituality that can reconcile evolution with faith, not denying evolution, not trying to force it to fit into a literal reading of Genesis, but accepting it as a revelation of the true majesty of nature, or God, if you prefer to use that word. A universe that creates life through evolution is far more impressive than a universe where God does magic. Think about it. A universe where the very structure of reality is such that, given the right conditions. Atoms inevitably organize into molecules, molecules into cells, cells into organisms, organisms into ecosystems, until finally the universe produces beings capable of contemplating and understanding it. This is infinitely more elegant than a god shaping clay with his hands. But let's return to the story of the Ark specifically, because this story is not just about abstract theology. It has been used as a political and scientific weapon in fascinating and disturbing ways. In the 19th century, when geologists began to realize that the Earth was much older than 6,000 years, there was a desperate attempt to save the literalness of the flood. Something called flood geology emerged. The idea was that all the layers of sedimentary rock, all the fossils, all the topography of the Earth could be explained by a single catastrophic event, Noah's flood. This was not a fringe theory. Respectable geologists tried to make it work. They wanted to believe in the Bible and also in the evidence they were finding in the rocks, so they attempted a synthesis. The flood would explain everything, but the more they studied, the less the theory worked. The rock layers were not consistent with a single flood. There were layers upon layers, each with different types of fossils, different types of sediments, different angles of deposition. There were coal layers, which require millions of years of compressed vegetation. There were salt formations that require slow evaporation of ancient oceans. There was evidence of multiple ice ages. There were volcanoes whose eruptions were clearly datable to millions of years through radiometric methods. Flood geology collapsed, not out of atheist prejudice, but because the evidence was overwhelming. The Earth was old, very old, and its history could not be compressed into a single flood 4,000 years ago. And the fossils were particularly problematic. If all animals were created simultaneously, and if there was a global flood that killed everything except what was on the Ark, then we should find fossils from all eras mixed in the same layer. We should find human fossils alongside dinosaur fossils. We should find fossils of modern mammals alongside trilobites, but we do not find that. The fossils are organized in distinct layers, trilobites in the oldest layers, dinosaurs in intermediate layers, mammals in more recent layers, humans only in the most superficial layers. There is a clear progression, an unequivocal temporal sequence, and this sequence cannot be explained by a single flood. Even more devastating, there are layers with fossilized dinosaur footprints, then another layer of sediment, then more footprints. This shows that dinosaurs lived, left footprints. The footprints were covered. Enough time passed for solidification, then more dinosaurs lived in the same place. This does not happen in a 40-day flood. This happens over millions of years. And the fossilized trees. There are fossilized trees that extend through multiple layers of rock supposedly deposited by the flood. How can a tree stand through multiple layers if all were deposited in 40 days? Wouldn't the tree fall? Wouldn't it rot? The only explanation is that the layers were deposited slowly, over enough time for the tree to be gradually buried while remaining upright. Evidence after evidence, flood geology disintegrated. And today no professional geologist, even those who are devout Christians, believes that Noah's flood explains the geological record. They may believe there was a local flood that inspired the story, but not a global one, not one that explains all the rocks and fossils. But some creationists have not given up. In the 20th century, scientific creationism emerged, and then intelligent design, attempts to give scientific clothing to religious beliefs. And the story of the Ark returned with force. There are people who claim to have found remnants of the Ark on Mount Ararat in Turkey. There are expeditions, there are documentaries, there are books, all claiming to have evidence of the Ark. But when independent scientists examine this evidence, it always turns out to be frauds or misunderstandings. Natural geological formations interpreted as wood, manipulated photos, unverifiable second-hand accounts. The Ark has never been found because it never existed, but the search continues because for many people, finding the Ark would prove that the Bible is literal. It would prove that they do not need to accept evolution. It would prove that God really intervenes in history in dramatic ways. And on the other side, there are atheists who use the impossibility of the flood as proof that God does not exist. If the Ark is false, they say, then all religion is false. If you cannot trust Genesis, you cannot trust anything in the Bible. But both sides are missing the point that Spinoza tried to teach. The question is not whether the story is literally true. The question is what the story means, what deeper truth it is trying to communicate through mythical language. The story of the flood, read as literature, is profoundly powerful. It speaks about moral judgment, about consequences, about new beginnings, about the tension between divine justice and divine mercy, about the fragility of civilization, about the relationship between humanity and nature. These are timeless questions, questions that each generation needs to confront, and the story of the flood is a way to explore these questions through dramatic narrative. But when you insist that it has to be factual history, you lose the depth. You reduce the story to a dispute over how many animals fit on a boat. And you create an unnecessary conflict with science. Spinoza saw this 300 years before the modern debate between creationism and evolution. He saw that forcing the Bible to be a book of science destroyed both the Bible and science. It destroyed the Bible because it forced it to make factual claims it cannot sustain, and it destroyed science because it forced it to bow to religious authority instead of following evidence. Spinoza's solution was elegant. Let the Bible be what it is, religious literature with moral wisdom, and let science be what it is, empirical investigation of physical reality. There is no conflict. There is only conflict when you confuse the domains. And that is the fundamental problem of modern creationism. It confuses domains. It treats the Bible as if it were a book of geology, biology, cosmology, and when the Bible inevitably contradicts what we observe in nature, it chooses to hold on to the Bible and reject observation. That is not faith. It is denial of reality, and it is unnecessary because you can have deep faith without denying scientific facts. You can believe in God without believing that the earth is 6,000 years old. You can find spiritual meaning in the Bible without believing that Noah put dinosaurs on the ark. In fact, many Christian scientists do exactly that. Francis Collins, who led the Human Genome Project, is an evangelical Christian who fully accepts evolution. Kenneth Miller, a biologist who testified against the teaching of intelligent design in public schools, is a devout Catholic. They see no contradiction because they do not force the Bible to be what it is not. And on the Jewish side, most modern rabbis do not see the Torah as a scientific manual. They see it as a theological document that uses metaphorical language to communicate spiritual truths. This has always been the traditional rabbinical approach. The ultra-literal reading is relatively recent and influenced by American Protestant fundamentalism, so the battle between the ark and evolution is largely artificial, created by people who insist on a reading of the Bible that the Bible itself does not demand. Because the Bible is full of poetry, metaphor, hyperbole, parable. Jesus spoke in parables. No one thinks he literally had a sower going out to sow. Everyone understands that it is a metaphor for spiritual teaching. Why should creation be different? Why can't it be a metaphorical story about the relationship between God, humanity, and nature? Why does it have to be scientific reporting? The answer, unfortunately, is psychological, not logical. Many people need the Bible to be literally true because their entire identities are built on that foundation. If you admit that Genesis is metaphor, where do you stop? Is Exodus metaphor? Are the Gospels metaphor? Is the resurrection metaphor? There is a fear of slippage, a fear that if you question one part of the Bible, the whole structure crumbles. And for many people, that structure is all they have. It is how they understand the world. It is how they deal with death. It is how they find community and purpose. And Spinoza understood that fear. He felt the consequences. To question. He was excommunicated, rejected, isolated. He paid the price of intellectual honesty. And yet he insisted that it was worth it, that living in truth, even if painful, was better than living in comfortable lies. Now we need to address an objection that always arises when we discuss Spinoza and evolution. The objection is this: if God is nature, if everything is determined by natural laws, if there is no free will, if there is no cosmic purpose, then why should we be moral? If we are merely biological machines following genetic programming, why not steal, kill, or rape when it suits us? This objection assumes that morality depends on divine reward and punishment, that we are good only because God is watching and judging us, and that, without a personal God, there is no basis for ethics. Spinoza completely rejected this reasoning. He argued that morality based on fear of punishment is not true morality. It is merely cowardly obedience. True morality comes from understanding what truly benefits humanity. And what benefits humanity is living according to reason, not according to blind passions. For Spinoza, emotions like anger, envy, and hatred are forms of slavery. They are automatic reactions to external circumstances. When you are controlled by them, you are not free. You are a puppet of your instincts. But when you understand the causes of your emotions, when you see clearly that they are merely neurochemical patterns triggered by stimuli, you gain power over them. You become free through understanding. And when you are free, you naturally act in ways that promote your true long-term well-being. And your true well-being is linked to the well-being of others, because you are part of a social system. Your happiness depends on having healthy relationships, living in a stable society, being part of a thriving community. Therefore, acting morally is not a sacrifice. It is enlightened self-interest. You do not need God threatening you with hell. You just need to clearly understand your true needs. This is a naturalistic ethics, an ethics that does not depend on supernatural revelation, and it is exactly the kind of ethics needed in a post-Darwin world. Because if evolution is true, then our moral instincts were not given by God. They were shaped by natural selection. Behaviors that increased chances of survival and reproduction were selected. Reciprocal altruism, cooperation, empathy, a sense of justice. All of these evolved because groups with these traits survive better than groups without them. We are social animals, and social animals need morality to function. So, morality has a biological basis. It does not mean that it is relative or arbitrary. It means that it is part of our nature. Just as we need food and water, we need social connection and cooperative behavior, not by divine commandment, by evolutionary necessity. And understanding this does not weaken morality. It strengthens it, because it shows that morality does not depend on believing in ancient books or specific theologies. It is universally human. Every culture has developed moral codes because every culture needs them to survive. The details vary. Some cultures allow polygamy, others do not. Some allow the death penalty, others do not. But the basic principles are universal. Do not kill without reason. Do not steal. Do not lie for no reason. Take care of your children. Cooperate with your group. These principles appear in every human society because they are necessary for societies to function. Spinoza was anticipating this evolutionary understanding of morality. He did not know natural selection, but he knew human nature, and he saw that we do not need a police god in the sky to make us behave well. We just need to understand our own nature and act according to it. And this resolves the apparent tension between evolution and morality. Evolution does not destroy morality. It explains morality. It shows where it comes from, why we have it, and why it is so powerful. Yes, evolution is a blind process without a final purpose, but it produced beings with purposes. We have goals, desires, values. And these are real, even if they emerged from mindless processes. Just as a computer can process information even without understanding what it is doing, a brain can create meaning even if it emerged from unconscious chemistry. And once you have conscious beings with the capacity to suffer and flourish, you have an objective basis for morality. Actions that increase suffering are bad. Actions that increase flourishing are good. You do not need God to establish this. You only need sentient beings. This is the basis of modern secular ethics, and it works perfectly well. Scandinavian countries are the least religious in the world, and also the most ethical by any metric. Lower crime, greater equality, better social care. So clearly, religion is not necessary for morality. But Spinoza's point was deeper. He was not just saying that you can be moral without God. He was saying that understanding that you are part of nature, part of God, if you will, makes you more moral. Because it removes ego. It removes the illusion that you are separate from the rest of existence. You see that hurting others is hurting yourself, because we are all parts of the same whole. This is an ethics of interconnectedness. And it is surprisingly similar to Buddhist and Taoist ethics that also see everyone as parts of a unified whole. Spinoza reached similar conclusions through European rational philosophy. And this suggests that there is something profoundly true about this view, that it emerges naturally when you think clearly about the nature of reality. And applying this to the question of the ark versus evolution, we see that it is not just a scientific dispute, it is a dispute about values. Creationists often say that without special creation, without human exceptionalism, without a divine soul, human life loses value. We are just animals, just cosmic accidents, without inherent meaning. But Spinoza would say that it is exactly the opposite. When you understand that you are part of the universe, that the universe produced you through billions of years of cosmic and biological evolution, that you are literally stardust organized into conscious patterns, that is profoundly significant. You do not need to be a special creation of a god to have value. You have value because you exist, because you can experience, because you can love, learn, create, contribute. And paradoxically, this naturalistic view makes each life more precious, not less. Because if this is the only life we have, if there is no guaranteed afterlife, then every moment is irreplaceable. Every experience is unique. Every person you love is invaluable. There is no reincarnation. There is no reunion in heaven. There is only now. This makes now infinitely valuable. Spinoza lived this philosophy. He had no hope of eternal life. He did not believe he would be rewarded in heaven for his sufferings on earth, and yet he lived with radical integrity. He refused bribes. He refused to compromise. He preferred poverty and isolation to intellectual dishonesty. Why? Because understanding the truth was for him the only real happiness, the only real freedom, and that is the challenge Spinoza leaves us. Do you have the courage to live without metaphysical safety nets, without promises of eternal life, without the illusion that a cosmic father is watching over you? Can you find meaning in an indifferent universe? Can you create purpose in a cosmos without intrinsic purpose? These are the real questions behind the ark versus evolution debate, and they are questions that each person must answer for themselves. There is no universal right answer. There is only honesty or dishonesty, courage or cowardice, truth or comfort. Now let us specifically examine the biological impossibilities of the ark story. Because even if you ignore geology, even if you ignore physics, just biology alone makes the story impossible as reported. The Bible says that Noah took 2 of each species, or 7 of each clean species depending on which version you read. Let's be generous and assume 2. How many animals would that be? Scientists have catalogued approximately 8 million species currently existing on Earth, but that is just species that are still alive. Estimates suggest that more than 99% of all species that have ever existed are extinct. So the real number would be much larger. But let's simplify. Let's assume only modern species. 8 million species times 2 individuals, 16 million individual animals. They would have to fit in a wooden boat approximately 137 meters long, 23 meters wide, and 14 meters high, according to biblical dimensions. It is immediately obvious that it does not fit. But creationists argue that Noah did not take all species, only the basic kinds created by God, that later diversified into modern species. This is interesting because they are essentially admitting rapid evolution. But let's ignore the irony. Even assuming only basic kinds, let's say a few thousand animals, you still have massive problems. How do you feed thousands of animals for months? Carnivores need meat. Herbivores need plants. Some animals have extremely specialized diets. Koalas eat only eucalyptus. Pandas eat only bamboo. How do you store enough of these foods on a boat of wood? And the water. Animals need fresh water. But if there is a global flood, the water outside is a mix of fresh and salt water. How do you store enough fresh water for thousands of animals for months? And the waste. Thousands of animals produce tons of waste daily. How do 8 people, Noah's family, clean all that up? How do they dispose of it? How do they prevent diseases that spread quickly in an environment with accumulated waste? And ventilation. The boat would have only a small window according to the Bible. How do you ventilate the air for thousands of animals breathing in a closed space? How do you prevent the accumulation of carbon dioxide and methane from the waste? And temperature. Animals have different thermal needs. Penguins need cold. Reptiles need heat. How do you maintain different temperature zones on a wooden boat without modern technology? And salt water. If the entire planet is covered in water, where does the fresh water come from after the flood? If the oceans mixed with fresh water, how did freshwater fish survive? How did saltwater fish survive if the water became less salty? And plants. The Bible does not mention Noah saving plants. But if the entire earth was submerged for months, how did plants survive? How did seeds survive underwater in extreme pressure from salt water? And when the waters receded, how did all the vegetation on the planet grow back so quickly that herbivores had something to eat? And insects, the Bible says 2 of every living creature. Does that include insects? There are over 1 million catalogued species of insects. How do you collect 2 of each? How do you keep them alive? How do you prevent predators from eating the prey during the journey? And parasites. Many parasites are host-specific. Human lice only live on humans. If only 8 humans survived, how did the diversity of human parasites survive? Did someone in the family have to be infested with every type of parasite to preserve them? That seems unpleasant and unlikely. And microorganisms. Bacteria, fungi, protozoa. Some are essential for ecosystems. How did they survive? Did Noah take 2 of every type of bacteria? And post-flood reproduction. 2 individuals of each species are not enough to maintain genetic viability. There is a concept in conservation biology called minimum viable population. For most species, you need hundreds or thousands of individuals to avoid severe inbreeding and extinction. 2 are not enough. All modern animals would show evidence of extreme genetic bottleneck if they came from just 2 ancestors a few thousand years ago, and they do not show that. And geographical distribution. After the flood, all animals would be on Mount Ararat in Turkey. How did marsupials get to Australia? How did lemurs get to Madagascar? How did sloths get to South America? These animals do not swim across oceans. They do not fly. How did they cross thousands of kilometers of ocean to reach their current habitats? And why are there no fossils or evidence of them along the way? And adaptation. Arctic animals like polar bears need extreme cold. Desert animals need extreme heat. How did both live in the same region of Mount Ararat after the flood? And how did they migrate to their habitats without leaving a trace? And predators versus prey. With drastically reduced populations, any predation would eliminate entire species. Lions killing zebras, wolves killing rabbits. How did prey survive long enough to reproduce if they started with only 2 individuals? And slow reproducing species. Elephants take years to reach sexual maturity and have a gestation period of nearly 2 years. How did the elephant population recover quickly after the flood? And social species. Many species need social groups to survive. Wolves hunt in packs. Elephants live in herds with complex social structures. How do you maintain social structures with only 2 individuals? Each of these objections is fatal to the historicity of the flood, and there are dozens more. The story does not work biologically, period. And here is the great irony. Creationists try to save the flood by invoking superfast evolution. They say basic kinds diversified into millions of species in just a few thousand years. But that would be evolution at a speed far greater than Darwin ever proposed. Darwin spoke of changes over millions of years. Creationists need changes in thousands of years. They are proposing hyper-evolution without realizing it. And if evolution can happen that fast, why insist on special creation? Why not simply accept normal evolution over billions of years? It is more plausible, it has more evidence, and it does not require constant miracles. The answer, of course, is that it is not about evidence, it is about maintaining biblical authority. Because if you admit that the flood story is a metaphor, you have to admit that other biblical accounts might also be metaphorical. And if you do that, where do you stop? Is the resurrection a metaphor? Is atonement a metaphor? The entire theological system depends on reading the Bible literally. But Spinoza had already shown that this approach is unsustainable. You cannot force ancient texts to conform to modern science. You have to let each do what it does best. Science explains the physical world. Religion offers structures of meaning. They do not need to compete. So where does that leave us? After all we have examined, after seeing how Spinoza demolished biblical literalism, how evolution explained the diversity of life, how geology and biology made the flood impossible, what can we conclude? The conclusion is both simple and profound. The story of Noah's Ark is not factual history, it is religious mythology, and that does not make it worthless. It simply places it in the correct category. As myth, the story is powerful. It speaks of moral consequences, of new beginnings, of the complex relationship between justice and mercy, of how humanity can become corrupt and need renewal. These are real psychological and spiritual truths, even if the events described never happened. And as mythology, the story does not need to compete with science. Evolution explains how biological diversity arose. The Ark explains how ancient cultures thought about moral judgment and cosmic renewal. They are different categories of truth. Spinoza was the first modern European thinker to articulate this clearly, and he paid a terrible price for his clarity. But his ideas survived and spread. They created the intellectual space necessary for the scientific revolution to flourish. Darwin does not cite Spinoza, but Darwin was working in a world that Spinoza had helped create. A world where it was possible to question religious authority. A world where nature could be studied on its own terms. A world where miracles were not acceptable answers to natural phenomena. And today, in the 21st century, we still need Spinoza's courage. Because the temptation to choose comfort over truth is constant. It is easier to believe that a personal God is taking care of you, that there is life after death, that you are special, that the universe was made for you. But the truth, as Spinoza saw, is harsher and more beautiful. You are not special in the cosmic sense. You are a temporary arrangement of atoms that just happen to become conscious. You will die, you will cease to exist, and the universe will continue without noticing your absence. And yet you exist now, you experience, you love, you learn, you create. And that is enough. It does not need to be eternal to have value. It just needs to be real. And reality, when you finally have the courage to look directly at it, is spectacular. You are the result of 14 billion years of cosmic evolution. You are made of elements forged in the cores of stars that exploded before the sun existed. You carry in your cells the complete history of life on Earth. Your DNA contains echoes of ancestors who swam in primordial oceans, who crawled onto land, who developed lungs, limbs, brains, consciousness. You are the universe's way of knowing itself, and that is more sacred than any myth of special creation. Spinoza saw this. He saw that God does not need to be a separate being magically creating. God can be the very structure of reality, the mathematical order that allows complexity to emerge from simplicity, the natural law that allows life to arise from chemistry, the evolution that allows consciousness to arise from matter. And if God is that, then studying science is studying God. Understanding evolution is understanding the divine creative method. There is no heresy in seeking knowledge. There is only reverence for the elegance of nature. The battle between Ark and evolution is, in the end, a battle between fear and courage. Fear that if we abandon old certainties, we will be lost. Fear that if we admit we do not know, we will lose meaning. Fear that if we face our cosmic insignificance, we will not be able to bear it. But Spinoza shows us that there is courage on the other side of fear, the courage to live without metaphysical safety nets, the courage to create meaning instead of receiving it. The courage to love knowing it is temporary, the courage 1,000 years old. They feel the pull of curiosity and the desire for truth, but they also feel the weight of expectation from their families and communities. They are caught in a conflict between their love for science and the teachings they have been raised with. This internal struggle can lead to feelings of isolation, guilt, and confusion. Many may choose to suppress their doubts, to conform to the beliefs of those around them, sacrificing their intellectual integrity for the sake of acceptance. Others may find the courage to speak out, to challenge the narratives they have been taught, risking their relationships and their place within their communities. This is a painful but necessary journey for those who seek to reconcile their faith with the evidence of the natural world. The story of the Ark versus evolution is not just a debate about scientific facts. It is a reflection of deeper issues of identity, belief, and belonging. It represents the struggle between tradition and truth, between the comfort of familiar beliefs and the discomfort of confronting reality. For many, the Ark symbolizes a worldview that provides certainty and meaning, while evolution represents a more complex and uncertain understanding of life. This tension is not easily resolved, and it often leads to a profound crisis of faith for those caught in the middle. As we navigate this complex landscape, it is essential to remember that the pursuit of truth is a noble endeavor. It requires courage, honesty, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable realities. The journey may be fraught with challenges, but it is also an opportunity for growth, understanding, and ultimately liberation. By embracing the principles of inquiry and skepticism, we can free ourselves from the shackles of dogma and discover a more profound and authentic connection to the world around us. In the end, the choice is yours. Will you embrace the truth, no matter how painful it may be? Will you have the courage to question, to explore, and to seek knowledge? Or will you choose the comfort of tradition, the safety of familiar beliefs, even if they conflict with the evidence before you? The path of truth may be difficult, but it is also the path to freedom. It is the path that Spinoza, Darwin, and countless others have walked before you. And it is a path that can lead to a deeper understanding of yourself, your place in the universe, and the nature of existence itself. As you reflect on these questions, consider the legacy of those who have come before you. Their struggles and triumphs can serve as a guide as you navigate your own journey. Remember that you are not alone. Many have faced similar challenges and have emerged stronger and more enlightened. The pursuit of truth is a collective endeavor, one that transcends individual beliefs and unites us in our shared humanity. In conclusion, the story of the Ark and evolution is a microcosm of a larger struggle between faith and reason, tradition and inquiry. It challenges us to examine our beliefs, to confront our doubts, and to seek a deeper understanding of the world around us. As we engage in this dialogue, let us do so with compassion, empathy, and an open mind. For in the end, the pursuit of truth is not just about the facts, it is about our shared journey as human beings seeking to make sense of our existence in a vast and mysterious universe. 1,000 years, but they cannot say this out loud without being socially excommunicated, without losing their families. Spinoza lived this tragedy. He was forced to choose between truth and community, and he chose truth. But the cost was terrible. He never married. He never had children. He died alone. And it is unfair that anyone should have to make this choice. The solution is not to convince everyone to abandon religion. The solution is to allow religion to evolve, to allow Christianity and Judaism to adapt to modern knowledge in the same way they have adapted to so many other changes throughout history. There was a time when Christians defended slavery using the Bible. Now most Christians agree that slavery is immoral, even though the Bible permits it. There was a time when Jews practiced animal sacrifice in the temple. Now there is no more temple, and sacrifices are seen as historical relics. Religions change. They have always changed. And they can change again. They can accept evolution while maintaining spirituality. They can see Genesis as theological poetry while accepting scientific geology. Many denominations already do this. Catholics have officially accepted evolution since 1950. Reform Jews accept it. Anglicans accept it. Millions of individual Christians and Jews accept it. The problem is not religion itself. The problem is fundamentalism. It is the insistence that ancient texts must be read literally, despite all contrary evidence. It is the refusal to allow interpretation to evolve. And ironically, this ultra-conservative literal reading is relatively recent. For centuries, Jewish and Christian theologians extensively used allegorical interpretation. Augustine, in the 5th century, warned against a literal reading of Genesis that would contradict natural knowledge. Maimonides, in the 12th century, said that metaphor should be used when literal interpretation conflicts with reason or observation. The modern hyper-literal reading is partly a reaction to modernity, not a continuation of ancient tradition. Spinoza was recovering a more sophisticated interpretive tradition. He was saying, read the Bible the way the biblical authors read it, with layers of meaning, with metaphor, with awareness of historical and literary context. And when you do this, the conflict between science and religion disappears, because you are no longer forcing an ancient text to be a science book. You are recognizing it for what it is. Religious literature from ancient cultures trying to understand their relationship with the divine. The story of the Ark in this reading does not need to be literally true to be meaningful. It teaches that actions have consequences, that societies can become corrupt beyond redemption, that new beginnings are possible, that alliances are important, that rainbows are beautiful. These are real human truths. And curiously, there are evolutionary parallels. Species go extinct when they cannot adapt. This is natural judgment. Other species emerge to fill empty niches. This is natural renewal. Life continues through cycles of extinction and renewal. The mythical flood is a metaphor for real natural processes of ongoing destruction and creation. So even evolutionarily, the story has relevance, not as history but as archetype, as a pattern that repeats in nature and human society. Civilizations grow, become corrupt, collapse. New civilizations arise from their ruins. The pattern is universal. We also need to address a profound philosophical question that Spinoza raised and that remains unresolved. If God is nature, if everything is determined by prior causes, if there is no genuine free will, then how are we responsible for our actions? Spinoza had a complex answer. He distinguished between freedom and free will. You do not have free will in the sense of being able to make completely independent choices from prior causes. Your thoughts are caused by brain chemistry, which is caused by genes and environment, which are caused by evolution and history in an infinite causal chain. But you can have freedom in the sense of acting according to your own nature without external coercion. A falling stone is not free because it is governed only by gravity. An animal is more free because it can respond to stimuli in complex ways. A human is even more free because they can understand the causes of their actions and modify them through reason. So freedom is not the absence of causality, it is self-determination. It is acting according to your own rational nature, instead of being pushed by external forces or irrational passions. And the more you understand the causes of your behaviors, the freer you become, because you can intervene consciously. This view is compatible with modern neuroscience. Studies show that decisions are initiated unconsciously fractions of a second before we are aware of them. This seems to eliminate traditional free will, but it does not eliminate responsibility. Because you includes unconscious processes, your unconscious brain is still yours. And you can train your brain, you can develop habits, you can expose yourself to information that changes neural patterns. You can practice meditation that increases control over impulses. In Spinoza's terms, you can increase your freedom through self-knowledge, and this has implications for how we treat criminals. If there is no absolute free will, retributive punishment does not make sense. You do not punish someone because they deserve to suffer. You punish because it is necessary to protect society or because it can reform behavior. This is consequentialist ethics, not retributivist. Curiously, this view also removes the basis for moral arrogance. If your good actions are the result of genetic and environmental luck, you cannot take pride in them as if they were your absolute merit. And if the bad actions of others are the result of bad genetic and environmental luck, you can condemn them without hating the person. This generates compassion. Spinoza lived this. He did not hate the rabbis who excommunicated him. He understood that they were acting according to their natures, shaped by fear and tradition. He saw them as causally determined to act as they did, and this did not make him less determined to seek truth. It only made him less bitter. This attitude is profoundly liberating. It removes resentment. It removes paralyzing guilt. It removes harsh judgment of oneself and others. You do what you can to improve, knowing that you are doing the best your current constitution allows, and that is enough. And applying this to the evolution versus creation issue, we see that it makes no sense to condemn creationists as stupid or malicious. They are products of education, culture, fear of losing community. You can disagree with their conclusions while understanding the causes of their beliefs, and you can gently present evidence hoping it will cause neural changes that lead to new conclusions. Forcing someone to change their belief rarely works, because beliefs are maintained by complex neural networks connected to emotions, identity, social relationships. You cannot simply swap beliefs like changing clothes. You need to gradually rebuild neural networks through repeated exposure to new information in a non-threatening context. This is part of the reason why creationism-evolution debates are so unproductive. Both sides attack. Both imply that opponents are stupid or dishonest. This activates psychological defenses. People entrench themselves more. No one changes their mind. A Spinozist approach would be different. It would involve calmly presenting evidence, clearly explaining reasoning, recognizing that changing one's worldview is frightening, offering ways to maintain spiritual values while accepting science, not forcing, just illuminating. And some creationists eventually change. There are moving stories of people raised in creationism who studied biology, geology, confronted evidence, and slowly, painfully, reconstructed their worldviews. They did not necessarily abandon faith, but they reinterpreted it in a way compatible with reality. These journeys are heroic. They require immense courage, because it means disappointing people you love. It means questioning teachings that were the foundation of your life. It means facing the existential fear that perhaps there is no life after death. Perhaps there is no cosmic purpose. Perhaps you are alone in an indifferent universe. Spinoza made this journey, and he left us a map, not a map of comforting certainties, but a map of how to live with uncertainty, how to find joy in understanding, instead of comfort in illusion, how to love without expectation of eternity, how to create meaning in a universe without inherent meaning. There is a psychological dimension to the ark versus evolution debate that is rarely addressed. The story of the ark is not just about the past, it is about the future. It is about the hope of salvation when everything seems lost. We live in an era of multiple crises. Climate change threatens global ecosystems. Nuclear weapons can destroy civilization in hours. Pandemics can kill millions. Economic inequality creates social instability. Automation threatens jobs. Artificial intelligence may surpass humans. There are legitimate reasons for existential anxiety, and the story of the ark offers a narrative structure to deal with this anxiety. It says, yes, the world will be destroyed, but there will be salvation for the righteous. God will not completely abandon humanity. There will be a new beginning. There will be a promise that it will never happen again. This narrative is psychologically powerful. It reduces intolerable anxiety to a manageable scenario. Instead of total meaningless extinction, there is destruction with purpose, followed by renewal. Instead of blind chance, there is a divine plan. Instead of helplessness, there is a guarantee that the good will be saved. Evolution does not offer this comforting structure. Evolution says, species go extinct all the time. Extinction is the rule, not the exception. 99% of all species that have ever existed are extinct. Humans are not special. If we go extinct, the universe will continue indifferent. There is no guarantee of salvation. There is no divine promise. There are only us and our choices. This is terrifying, and understanding why people prefer the narrative of the ark helps to have compassion for resistance to evolution. It is not just about scientific evidence. It is about which story you want to live, and the story of divine purpose is much more appealing than the story of blind chance. But Spinoza would say that the second story, although more frightening, is also more honest. And living in honesty is better than living in illusion, even if illusion is comforting, because illusion eventually collapses when confronted with reality, and then you are unprepared. If you believe that God will save the righteous, you may not take the necessary action to save yourself. If you believe that climate change is part of a divine plan leading to the prophesied end times, you may not fight to prevent it. Religious illusion can be paralyzing, but if you accept that there is no guaranteed salvation, that it is in our hands to prevent catastrophe, then perhaps you will act. Perhaps you will reduce emissions. Perhaps you will pressure governments. Perhaps you will innovate solutions. Despair can motivate action, where passive hope does not. And ironically, Spinoza's naturalistic view may inspire more responsibility than traditional theistic views. Because if there is no God fixing everything, if we are part of nature governed by natural laws, then it is up to us to use our intelligence to navigate these laws. We are products of evolution, yes, but we are products of evolution, with brains capable of predicting consequences and modifying behavior. That is our evolutionary advantage, and using it well is a way to honor nature, or God, if you prefer that term, not through rituals and prayers, but through understanding and action based on understanding. Science applied ethically is Spinozist spirituality. So when we confront the climate crisis, we do not need the narrative of the ark. We need the narrative of human responsibility. We cause the problem. We can solve the problem, not through divine intervention, through intelligent collective choices. And when we confront pandemics, we do not need a story of divine judgment. We need epidemiology, vaccination, public health, not through prayer, through medicine based on an evolutionary understanding of how viruses work. And when we confront inequality, we do not need a promise of justice in the afterlife. We need policies that create justice here, not through waiting for celestial reward, through building a more just society now. This is applied Spinozist ethics. It is taking responsibility instead of delegating to God. It is using reason instead of relying on miracles. It is growing as a species, and this growth is cultural evolution. Just as species evolve biologically, societies evolve culturally. Ideas compete. Better ideas spread. Worse ideas are eventually abandoned. It is natural selection of concepts. Creationism is losing this competition, not because there is an atheist conspiracy, but because it does not explain evidence as well as evolution. And in societies with good scientific education, people eventually realize this. The acceptance rate of evolution is high in countries with strong scientific education. It is low in countries where scientific education is weak or where religious fundamentalism is strong. This is not a coincidence. It is cultural selection. Societies that teach science well produce citizens who accept science. Societies that prioritize religious doctrine over evidence produce citizens who reject science. And in the long run, evidence-based societies have the advantage, producing more technology, more medicine, more prosperity. So evolution is winning not through force, but through results. And this is exactly how it should be according to Spinozist principles. Truth eventually prevails because it reflects reality. And reality always has the final word. We now come to one of the deepest questions raised by this whole discussion. If the story of the Ark is a myth, if the Bible is not a scientific authority, if God does not intervene with miracles, then what remains of religion? For many people, the answer is nothing. If you remove the supernatural, you remove the religious. Religion without miracles is just secular philosophy with hymns. But Spinoza would disagree. He would argue that genuine religion has never been about miracles. It has always been about something deeper, about connection with the whole, about transcending ego, about living ethically, about finding peace through understanding. And these experiences do not depend on believing in supernatural events. You can experience reverence in the face of the vastness of the cosmos without believing it was created in 6 days. You can feel gratitude for existence without believing that a personal God loves you specially. You can find meaning through contributing to something greater than yourself without believing in an afterlife. This is naturalistic spirituality, and it is growing. There is a growing movement of people who identify as spiritual but not religious. They meditate but do not pray. They feel connection with nature but do not personify it as deity. They seek understanding, but through science and philosophy, not through revealed scriptures. Sam Harris, a neuroscientist and vocal critic of religion, wrote a book advocating for secular spirituality. He argues that deep meditative states, experiences of ego dissolution, sensations of unity with the universe are all real and valuable, but they do not require supernatural beliefs. They are neurological phenomena that can be cultivated through practice. And he is right. Meditation works. Studies show that it alters brain structure, reduces stress, increases focus, improves well-being, and it works equally for Buddhists, Hindus, contemplative Christians, atheists. The practice is what matters, not the belief. Spinoza would have completely approved. He advocated for the daily practice of rational contemplation of the universe. Not petitionary prayer, but contemplation, thinking about the eternal order of things, understanding your position in the whole, accepting the necessity of everything that happens, and through this acceptance finding peace. He called this amor intellectualis Dei, the intellectual love of God. Not emotional love, intellectual love, rational appreciation of the elegance of the universe. And he claimed that this was the greatest happiness possible for a human being, superior to sensory pleasures, superior to worldly successes, the joy of understanding. And this joy is available to anyone willing to do the intellectual work. It does not require initiation into secret mysteries. It does not require priests as intermediaries. It does not require special rituals. It requires only honesty, reason, persistence. And when you achieve this understanding, when you truly internalize that you are part of nature, that the same substance composes you and stars and bacteria, something changes. The boundaries between you and the world partially dissolve. You see that the distinction between you and not you is conventional, not absolute. This is not nebulous mysticism. It is physical reality. The atoms in your body were forged in stars. You are literally stardust. The The water molecules you drink were part of dinosaurs, ancient oceans, clouds. You are constantly exchanging matter with the environment. The boundary between you and the world is permeable. And ecologically, you are part of a complex network. You breathe oxygen produced by plants. You eat other organisms. You host trillions of microorganisms in your body. You are a walking ecosystem. You are a node in the planetary life network. And evolutionarily, you carry a history of billions of years in your cells. Your DNA contains genes shared with all forms of life. You are a distant cousin of bacteria, fungi, plants, animals. Literally, all life on Earth is your family. When you truly feel this, when it is not just an intellectual concept but a visceral experience, it transforms perspective. You can no longer see yourself as separate. You are part. And hurting the network is hurting yourself. Protecting the network is protecting yourself. This is deep ecological ethics, and it emerges naturally from the Spinozist understanding that everything is one. It does not need divine commandments. It only needs clear seeing. And this creates a foundation for environmentalism that goes beyond utilitarian arguments. It is not just that we must protect nature because we need it to survive. It is that nature is not something separate to be protected. We are nature. Protecting nature is protecting ourselves. Destroying nature is suicide, and this realization can motivate behavioral change more deeply than abstract moral appeals. When you see that polluting a river is literally polluting your own extended body, you stop polluting, not out of duty, out of enlightened self-preservation. This is Spinozist wisdom applied to the ecological crisis, and it is desperately needed. Because traditional approaches are not working fast enough, we need a deeper transformation of consciousness. We need to move from a worldview that sees humans as separate and superior to nature to a view that sees humans as an integrated part of nature. And ironically, evolution should facilitate this transition, because evolution shows precisely that we are part of nature, not above it. We are products of natural processes. We are subject to natural laws. We are vulnerable to ecological collapse like any other species. So accepting evolution should lead to ecological humility. But curiously, many who accept evolution still act as if they are separate from nature. They still exploit resources unsustainably. They still treat other species as objects. Intellectual knowledge has not translated into behavioral change. Spinoza would say that this is because knowledge has not been complete. It has only been partial, abstract. It needs to be emotionally internalized, not just intellectually understood. It needs to become part of how you see the world immediately, not just something you know theoretically. And achieving this requires practice. Not just reading about evolution and ecology, but spending time in nature, observing, contemplating, meditating on interconnection, letting conceptual knowledge seep into direct perception. This is spirituality for the 21st century, grounded in science, informed by evolution and ecology, but still capable of inspiring reverence, gratitude, a sense of belonging to something greater. It does not require abandoning reason. It requires applying reason to its fullest consequences. We have reached the end of this intellectual journey through 4 centuries of thought. We began with a young Jew in 1656 being excommunicated for questioning biblical authority. We traveled through the Enlightenment, through scientific and political revolutions, through the discovery of evolution, to the present moment where we still grapple with the same fundamental questions: arc or evolution, faith or reason, comfort or truth. And Spinoza's answer echoes through the centuries. It does not have to be a binary choice. You can have reinterpreted faith. You can have spirituality informed by science. You can have reverence without superstition. The story of Noah's Ark never happened as reported. The evidence is overwhelming. Geology, biology, physics all agree. There was no global flood 4,000 years ago. There was no boat saving all the animals. There was no restart of humanity from one family. But that does not make the story worthless. As a myth, it speaks profound psychological truths about judgment, renewal, covenant, hope. As literature, it is powerful and moving. As part of cultural tradition, it deserves to be studied and appreciated. The mistake is to confuse categories. It is to insist that myth must be history, that metaphor must be literal, that faith depends on denying evidence. And evolution, on the other hand, explains how we got here better than any other theory. It explains species diversity. It explains geographical distribution. It explains the fossil record. It explains comparative anatomy. It explains genetics. It explains embryology. It explains everything we observe about life on Earth. But evolution does not answer all human questions. It does not tell you how to live morally. It does not give you comfort in the face of death. It does not provide a sense of cosmic purpose, not because it is incomplete, but because these are not scientific questions. They are philosophical and existential questions, and Spinoza shows us how to approach these questions without resorting to fiction. You find morality through understanding human nature and human needs. You deal with mortality by accepting that you are part of a larger process that continues. You create purpose by choosing what you value and working to achieve it. It is not easy. It is much harder than accepting ready-made answers from traditional religions, but it is honest. And honesty has intrinsic value, and perhaps, just perhaps, honesty is the only way to build a sustainable future. Because illusions eventually collide with reality, and when they collide, the costs are high. Societies built on myths collapse when myths are exposed, but societies built on an understanding of reality can adapt when reality changes, and reality is changing rapidly. Climate change is accelerating, biodiversity is collapsing, resources are depleting, population is growing, technology is advancing exponentially. The challenges we face as a species are unprecedented. And to navigate these challenges, we need clear thinking. We need rigorous science. We need global cooperation based on a shared understanding of facts. We cannot afford debates about whether the Earth is 6,000 years old. We cannot waste time trying to teach creationism in schools. We need to educate the next generation in evolutionary biology, ecology, climate science, critical thinking. We need to equip them with the mental tools to face the complexity of the 21st century. And this does not mean abandoning spirituality. It means maturing it. It means moving it from a mythical stage to a rational stage. It means integrating science and values into a coherent worldview. Spinoza gave us a model for how to do this, and his model is even more relevant today than it was in 1656, because the challenges we face are greater, the stakes are higher, and the margin for error is smaller. If we continue to deny the reality of climate change because it conflicts with religious visions of the end times, we condemn future generations to immeasurable suffering. If we continue to reject evolution because it threatens imagined human exceptionalism, we deprive society of an understanding that could guide medicine, agriculture, conservation. Choices have consequences, and denying reality does not change it. It only leaves us unprepared when reality hits us. So the battle between Ark and evolution is not just an academic dispute. It is about our collective future. It is about whether we will choose to live in comfortable fantasy or confront uncomfortable truth. It is about whether we will have the courage that Spinoza had, and that courage does not require abandoning everything you value. It requires only honesty, the honesty to look at evidence without bias, the honesty to admit when you are wrong, the honesty to change your mind when the data warrants it. This is intellectual humility, and it is rare. It is easier to cling to familiar beliefs. It is easier to reject evidence that contradicts. It is easier to remain in a community that reinforces your views. Change is hard. Change is scary. Change means loss, but it also means growth. It means learning. It means closer alignment with reality. And that has a value that transcends immediate comfort. Spinoza chose growth over comfort. He chose truth over belonging. He chose intellectual freedom over social security. And he paid a terrible price. But his ideas survived. His ideas helped shape the modern world. His ideas still challenge us today. So when you face the choice between accepting evolution or maintaining creationism, between accepting an ancient Earth or insisting on a young Earth, between accepting that you are an evolved animal or insisting that you are a special divine creation, remember Spinoza. Remember that truth has value. Remember that honesty has courage. Remember that you can build a meaningful life on a foundation of reality instead of a foundation of myth. And remember that the universe revealed by science is more wonderful than any creation story ever invented. Billions of years of cosmic evolution, stars dying to create elements, chemistry becoming life, life becoming consciousness, consciousness contemplating its own origins. You are part of this process. You are the universe becoming conscious of itself, and there is nothing more sacred than that. The story of the ark versus evolution is, in the end, your story. It is about you deciding what kind of person you want to be, whether you will live in truth or in lie, whether you will have the courage to question or the fear to doubt, whether you will grow or stagnate. Spinoza made his choice.